Okay, the next thing that we need to look at are all of the challenges that had occurred throughout the world following World War I and World War II, and how the newly formed United Nations and allied powers plan on dealing with all of these problems. So, in this lesson, we're going to be looking at the reshaping and decolonization of different locations in the Middle East, East Asia, particularly with Japan, and then South Asia with India and uh, Pakistan, and then Southeast Asia as well with French Indochina. Okay, so these were all of the different post-war problems and solutions that existed. And so each one of these, we're pretty much going to go up to, looks like, we're going to talk about League of Nations, Japan, Jewish situation, and then, and a couple other things. Uh, you guys already looked at the mass atrocities, and then we'll look at Germany and then the spread of communism a little later. Okay, so the first problem was what to do with the League of Nations because it had not done too well following World War I. So in 1947, George C. Marshall developed a plan for the United States where we would pay out billions of dollars for European reconstruction. This is the exact same thing that we did after World War I, if you remember. It was offered to everybody, but the only countries who actually accepted it were the Allied countries. So this was called the Marshall Plan. The next thing was the establishment of the United Nations. The primary goal was to mediate and intervene, if necessary, in international disputes between nations. So in 1948, and this is what you guys just did in class last time, they created the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which detailed rights for women, children, and refugees worldwide, but it also set specific descriptions for what constitutes war crimes. The last thing is the establishment of the World Trade Organization. This was the establishment of the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and general agreement on trade and tariffs that would be discussed between different global. So, for the United Nations, the outbreak of World War II revealed obviously the many weaknesses that the League of Nations had. In 1945, 48 nations, including the United States and the former Russia, the Soviet Union, formed the UN. The headquarters are located in New York City, and today the UN serves to protect international peace and equal rights. The General Assembly, where each member nation is able to cast a vote on numerous editions or numerous issues, is at the heart of the UN. But the real power, and here's what a lot of people don't know, lies within the Security Council. This is a 5 member board as part of the General Assembly. It includes Britain, China, France, the United States, and the Soviet Union. And the kicker is that each of these countries has veto power, so they could veto any Security Council action. This is going to come into play a lot later on during the Cold War because the Soviet Union refuses to show up to a couple of the meetings, and the part with the veto power, if you are not present at the meeting, you could not veto something. So if they found out what had been discussed and they purposefully chose not to show up, then they had no say in any of the decision making. And so that's going to really, really kind of play into some of the events that occur throughout the Cold War. The UN also, which has something that the League of Nations didn't have, they had military force, which was made up of member nation soldiers, as well as an international court similar to the ones that were used to try Nazi war criminals following World War II. During the Nuremberg trials, as you've already seen, the Nazi leaders were tried for their war crimes, including the murder of 6 million Jews during Hitler's final solution. This is a diagram that just kind of shows how the UN works with the General Assembly. This is that Security Council, the group of countries that are a part of this that have that veto power. Okay, so we have to kind of go back a little bit. So we've got to go back to before and during World War One, especially when we talk about what is going on in the Middle East. Even with what's going on today, you have to have the context there. Okay, so big issue, as we know, during the Berlin Conference and the scramble for Africa and spheres of influence, that entire time period we just talked about with imperialism. Now we've got to figure out what to do with all these different colonies that remained following World War II. So there were thousands of colonial subjects between Africa and Asia that, because they were colonies, they were forced to or they voluntarily joined into the war efforts for their European counterparts. There were a couple instances where German propaganda actually succeeded and led to a couple of revolts, but none of them were too successful. The one that really kind of is most notable was a village in present day Burkina Faso, which united together to drive out French forces, but ultimately it failed. Remember, we talked about the 14 points constructed by Woodrow Wilson. It established the notion of self determination or self rule to colonized people. But remember, there were a lot of different exceptions based off of the Allied powers. Well, no shocker in what I'm about to say, but the same thing is going to happen after World War II. The different individuals who fought for Europe following World War I, they thought that they would receive independence, but the big three met following the war, and they were only willing to grant freedom to countries in Eastern Europe. So they basically excluded any of the colonies. So it was basically if you were a part of the Ottoman Empire, or if you were well in the European region, or if you were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you had self-determination. But when it came to any different region in Africa or Asia, that didn't apply to you. Middle Eastern lands belonging to the Ottoman Empire were divided up among Britain and France, and the colonized lands in Africa and the rest of Asia belonging to Germany were divided up also among Britain and France. We've talked about this a little bit already. So what we're going to see is some decision making later on during and after World War II, where we're going to see mandates being put in place, and then we're going to see partitioning as well. This is a big topic um, that you see emerge throughout Unit 8. So if you hopefully you've been working on the packet, but Unit 8, a big portion of it is decolonization. And part of that is how did the UN and how did some of these other Western powers, how did they deal with allowing people self-determination within the colonies that they had already possessed following World War II, since they didn't give it after World War I. And we're going to see that some of them are not going to be too thrilled about giving up um, their possessions. So the first one let's look at is Israel and Palestine. This is very, very relevant to what is going on today. Okay, so here is a world map before World War One, just to kind of get your bearings as to what we're doing. Here's an inset of Europe. Okay, so 1914, World War One begins. Britain, France, and Russia were the allies. Ottoman Empire, Germany, Austria, Hungary were known as the Central Powers. The war was fought in Europe, but it affected the Middle East tremendously. Okay, so this is going back to World War One. So following World War One, the Allied powers all meet up and they agree that once the war is over, each one of them would control different parts of the Ottoman Empire, except for the Arabian Peninsula. Now, we already just discussed the fact that they're not going to give up any of their colonial assets in other parts of the world beyond Europe. So they already knew this, and they still promised self-determination to different groups of people, but then when it went into play, they basically said, nah, they really need us to keep things organized. So for that reason, we're keeping it. Um, so they all meet, they agree that they are going to take different parts of the Ottoman Empire, but the exclusion was the Arabian Peninsula. Here's the tricky part, the kind of the sneaky issue. The Allies agreed to allow the Arabs to have the Arabian Peninsula, and that this would be kind of like their thank you from the Allied powers for helping to assist in bringing down the Ottoman Empire. Now, you guys talked about the Armenian genocide and how the Ottomans very much blamed them for their loss in World War One. Really, there were a bunch of different Arabic groups that had already made uh, um, uh, joint had joint discussions with the Allied powers, and they were trying their hardest to weaken the Ottoman Empire from within. But of course, the Armenians are going to be the ones that are going to be blamed. They were the scapegoat. Before the war even ended, though, it was completely evident that the Allies had never intended upon following through with this promise. So ultimately, they lied and they secretly meant to divide up the land without including any leader from Southwest Asia, the Middle East, in the discussion. Palestine, Transjordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq all became part of what was called, or part of the League of Nations mandates. And so when we look at these partitions and mandates later on, you'll see how everything gets divided up. The Arabs in these areas developed what was called Pan-Arabism. We're going to see two pan words emerge at this time, so Pan-Arabism and Pan-Africanism. In both cases, both of these are a belief that, and it's like kind of like an ideology where certain people believe in the unification of every land that is involved in this territory. So for people who believed in Pan-Arabism, they believed that all of the lands within the Arab world should be unified to become one joint entity, one joint nation per se. We're going to see the same thing happen in South Asia. We're going to see the same thing happen in Africa. In 1917, the British issued what was called the Balfour Declaration. This has been on the test before in the past, the kids have told me, stating that Palestine would become home to the Jews who had been persecuted against in Europe. Now, this is before the Holocaust. Okay, so keep that in mind. So the Balfour Declaration was created in 1917 to go ahead and help put those Jews, this is part of the Zionist expulsion from Russia and some of the other different groups in Europe. They had already been persecuted against. And so the Balfour Declaration stated that Palestine would also have to open up and allow the Jews to come in and settle in the land as well. Following World War I, Britain claimed authority over Palestine, and European Jews began to migrate into the area as a result. So, again, this is before the Holocaust. Those who did move into this newly established Jewish homeland refer to themselves as the Zionists. This was part of the Zionist movement. So you're going to see this map or this chart a lot in this presentation because we're going to go step by step. So where we are here, so 1917, this area you see in this kind of wine red color, where this was after the mandate for Palestine at the time of the Balfour Declaration. Okay, so this entire region was kind of given to the Jews as a potential homeland for them to migrate into. Okay, moving. The Arab rebels within the Ottoman Empire were particularly insulted, not surprisingly, since they had agreed to fight for the Allies in return for freedom. The Allies broke their promise at the peace conference and established instead a mandate system to rule the colonies belonging to the Central Powers. The peace conference involved David Lloyd George, Woodrow Wilson, and George Clemenceau. In particular, Article 22 of the League of Nations stated that colonized people in Africa and Asia require tutelage, which means guidance, from more advanced nations in order to survive. So this was our way of saying it's basically Europe, not everybody else. Y'all are excluded because you still need our help. Essentially, the European powers in Japan increased their land holdings through a new form of colonization. So this is like colonization 3.0. The portion of the land given to the Arabs became Saudi Arabia. So they were given a portion of the Arabian Peninsula, but that was not the total amount that they had been promised. The Ottoman Empire was reduced to present day Turkey. Palestine was mandated and jointly controlled by both France and Great Britain. And as a result of World War I, Britain won control over the area of Palestine from the Ottomans. This became known as the British Mandate of Palestine. So we have the Balfour Declaration. Now we have the British Mandate of Palestine. Britain actually governed this territory from 1918 to 1948. Just so you know, a mandate is when land is divided up and governed by an outside power on behalf of the League of Nations until it was ready for independence. And so this is going to be basically this solution to this problem following World War I. Arabs were outraged again because they had been promised self-determination. So we are now here. Okay, so Balfour Declaration, and now we have the Mandate of Palestine. And so now you can see this entire region right here was named Palestine. So you can see already why things are going to become kind of like a they said type thing. So Jews have been told based off the Balfour Declaration that this is their territory. They can move in and live anywhere within these constraints. But a few years later, the Mandate of Palestine was established, stating that this region right here would be known as Palestine, and this was an Arab region. The Jews could go into again what had been there for the Balfour Declaration. 1929, we start to see the beginnings of some riots, which kind of led to this internal civil war type situation. As more Jews migrated into the region following World War One, Arabs retaliated by boycotting businesses and burning bridges and crops. Of course, this is going to destroy the infrastructure, which was their goal because they wanted to stop the inflow of goods. This resulted in people being killed on both sides, though. So it wasn't just let's destroy the infrastructure. It did turn into a full on fight between people that resulted in many, many deaths. Um, this was kind of a boiling point that we saw of this rivalry and this conflict that has been here since the beginning of civilization. I mean, going back to the Philistines in ancient civilization and the Jews or the Hebrews moving into Canaan, all of that. I mean, this has always been a hotly contested zone, and religiously, it's deemed to be the religious homeland for the three Abrahamic religious groups. So, a lot of contested land here. What's interesting is Jews describe the violence as riots, but from the Palestinian perspective, they claimed that the violence was a revolt. It was their revolt, not a riot. All of this is going to kind of come to a head in 1935 with the assassination of a kind of a rebel leader. So during the riots and revolts, many people on both sides became highly radicalized. There was a Sheikh Al Qassam. He was the religious leader who organized a small armed group to resist British authority in Jewish settlements. He was a major target of the British. They saw him as their primary threat, kind of like their Joan of Arc. And so there's another typo. There was a shootout with the British. He was killed, and similar to Joan of Arc, he became a martyr for the Palestinians, and it just spurred them on. It made them fight even harder. In response to his killing, the Arabs in the mandated area began rioting and seizing illegal firearms destined for Jewish defensive forces. So this was where everything kind of took a turn because um, they 100% were now going to engage in full on war against the British officers in that area. It lasted until 1939. Britain wanted to garner support for the Arabs to counter German aggression. So this is so God. How many times are we going to play these people against one another? It's just crazy. So we say that we're on the side of, or they say they're on the side of the Jews, and then World War II happens, it rears its ugly head, and then we go back to the Arabs and we say, hey, we need your help again. We need you guys to help us bring down this German tyrant. So, what we'll promise to do is we will no longer sell any land within this territory to people of Jewish descent. So, you don't have to worry about any more Jews coming onto your land. We will stop the sale. You guys get to keep what remains. We're not going to take any more away from you. And this was again another promise by the Allies to the Arabs saying that they would promise not to give away any more or sell any more of that land that was the Palestinian land. But this, of course, as we know, was only throughout World War II, simply to get the Arabs again to fight on our side, to support us. This led to an event known as May Day, or numerous May Days, but May Day 1936 in relationship to the Great Arab Revolt. This was kind of the beginning of this next massive dispute that occurred in this region. So, Arab workers and political groups organized strikes and demonstrations on May 1st, 1936, and shortly after, Palestinian leaders called for a regional business and infrastructure strike so that none of the British or Jews could benefit from Arab-run services and products. This quickly transformed into destruction of infrastructure, even more so than the first time, and attacks against British forces. Second phase of the conflict, and I think you guys know where this is headed. Following World War II, Again, we've already talked about this, but when the soldiers found these camps, the world was shocked by the horror that they were facing. But they weren't shocked enough to provide them with an open area for them to settle, right? So we pity you, but we don't want the refugees. So as we know, 6 million Jews were killed in concentration camps, and the word of this massacre spread, and so there was an outpouring of support for them. But again, nobody wanted to help them enough to allow them to come in and live freely in their country. So, option one, we could give them back their homes. And I have students who ask this every year, why couldn't they just move back into the homes that they lived? Think about this for a second. Why not? I'll give you a second. Well, why can't they move back into their homes? Okay, partly because they were destroyed, right? So you're talking about buildings and homes that existed throughout the main battlefield of Europe in World War II. The other reason was some other families had already moved into them. And those families who remain in those homes, you can't displace one family to simply put another family back. That's not the game that they were going to play. So that option was out of the question. The next option, you could allow Jews to settle in allied nations. But again, every single nation in Europe claimed, oh well, we already took our quota. We took 80,000 Jews, or we took 90,000 Jews. The Americans took 100,000 Jews. We were very selective in who we took, but we took some, and that was our humanitarian effort for there. So the final option was, let's just put them back in their homeland, right? We did this after World War One. Now we're going to do it again. But remember the promise we had made to Arabs to get them to fight on our side. It's the same thing over and over again. So we broke another promise. The mandate that had been established and the promises that we had given for self-determination, because they were helping us, we reneged on that as well. So the British actually instead helped to facilitate the ushering in of Jews and help them purchase land. Again, land that we had told the Arabs that we would not sell anymore to people of Jewish descent. At this point, historically, if you look at a population map or population graph, the Arabs in this region, they made up about 70% of the population, and they were allied with the entire Arab world. So any decision we make, and this is the second time around we're going to do this, it's not going to go over well. Um, at this suggestion, not surprisingly, the Arabs became furious that this had happened a second time, and so they actually established something called the Arab League, whose responsibility it would be to plead diplomatically with the UN against decisions that would affect them negatively in the future. The Arab League was founded March 22nd, 1945. It was a regional organization created by Arab countries, again, to coordinate political positions, promote economic and cultural cooperation, and to support independence movements. The nations that joined were Egypt, Iraq, Transjordan, which today is Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Yemen. And so now we are here. All right, so now we're looking at the white territory. This is the white is unowned land. And then the blue, as you can see, there are some blue speckled areas. Those are territories that were owned by Jewish people. And then the green were Arabic groups. Okay, so meanwhile, the UN had formed a special committee to find a solution to the problem, and the committee recommended that Palestine be partitioned into two states, one for the Arab people and one for the Jewish people. But if you looked at the map, and I'm going to show you the map in a second, the split was not fair. The Jewish state was given more than half of the land in this area, despite the fact that fewer than 50% of the population there was actually Jewish. And the land that was given to the Arabs was mostly desert and unirrigated. It was not arable land. The Jews got most of the fertile land with freshwater access. So May 14th, 1948, Great Britain releases Palestine to the United Nations, and Zionist leaders proclaimed the state of Israel the same exact day. So May 14th, Great Britain releases Palestine to the UN. They give it up, and then they say, this is basically your problem. And the very next moment, Zionist leaders for Israel proclaim that the state of Israel has now been formed. And so you can see this is just going to really kind of just tick off the Arabs in that area. So now we are here. So the UN proposal. The blue territory, that would be the land given to the Jewish people. Notice how they have access to most coastal areas here. And then the Arab groups were going to be given the Western Bank or West Bank, Golan Heights, and Gaza right down here. And then the yellow, that is Jerusalem. That is international territory. All right, so Jewish leaders obviously accepted the plan. Arab leaders did not. War broke out almost immediately because of this. In response, the Arab League put out a statement saying, "We Arabs shall not be losers. We shall be fighting on our ground and shall be supported by more than 70 million Arabs around us." The person who said this was Abdul Azam. He was Secretary General of the Arab League. And so you can see directly on this one, this is a close-up map, so you can kind of see where the territory existed for both sides. Okay, so what sucks at this point is basically we're going to see war break out within hours. Um, it was almost instantaneous. You could see this named a couple different things. So the Israelis called this the War of Independence, but the Palestinians called it the catastrophe. It's also, though, known globally in a much larger context, known as the Arab-Israeli War, and that's kind of a neutral term that historians use to describe this. It's unbiased. 700,000 Palestinians were forced to flee in a moment's notice or were driven out of their mandated areas. So this was a total shock to some of these people. So the instant that this partition was made, and we're going to see the same thing happen in South Asia between India and then East and West Pakistan, is that if you were an ethnicity on the opposite side once the partition went into action, you had to pack up and move immediately, or you were going to literally be under fire by someone who claimed that that was now their land, their home. So 700,000 Palestinians were driven out of their mandated area um, to make it to a place that was peaceful. Israel claimed a large tract of land and ended up destroying around 500 villages. So instead of the UN hoping that this partition would bring about peace, it turned into absolute chaos and an opportunity for Israel to already start taking land that was not theirs. And so, again, we see this almost instantly. And since this moment, this has been the same song and dance that Israel has done time and time again. They have taken every opportunity, even recently, as we're seeing in the news right now, to throw their weight around, use the UN and now the USA to do their bidding for them. And so what we're seeing now is, in the last couple years, is they have just gone into Gaza. They've taken more and more territory. The Golan Heights don't even exist anymore. I mean, it's just part of their territory. It was just an absolute mess almost immediately. So Israel instantly goes in and they start claiming land and destroyed around 500 villages. Jordan, the leaders of Jordan come in and they actually claimed control over the West Bank. Now they were allied with the Palestinians, the Arab Palestinians, and so they thought that if they could come in and claim the West Bank, that it would prevent Israel from taking it. The same thing happened with Egypt. Egypt hurries up and they go in to take control of the Gaza Strip to help support the Palestinians from a takeover there as well. So I know it sounds like they invaded individually, but they were doing it to support the Arabs so that if they claimed that land for themselves and the Israelis come in, they could actually say, nope, now you've taken Egyptian territory. Now you're starting a war with Egypt. So it was a strategical move for them. Eventually, armistice agreements were signed throughout 1949. There were 4 agreements in total, one for every single other Arab nation that attacked at the same time to prevent the Israeli forces from taking other territories. But there was not one, of course, with Palestine. December 11th, the UN General Assembly passed Resolution 194, which stated that Palestinian refugees who wished to return to their home should be permitted to do so without any type of violence. And if they did not want to return home, they should be compensated for their losses by Israel. So if you were forced to flee from your home because you were on the opposite side of the partition plan and you did not want to return, Israel was expected to pay out you money for your losses. Or you could go back to your home, gather up all of your things, and move out peacefully. And so this was supposed to be, because the UN was involved at this point, anything going against this technically could have been considered a war crime. So this was done peacefully. It is highly contested today, though, because the Palestinians still see Resolution 194 as a supporting document for their return. But the Israelis, of course, argue that it was not a legally binding document and that it was only issued for the time period following the war, the dispute between the Arabs and the Israelis. So they said that it was only for immediately after, and that after they packed up their things, they had to leave. So, but today again, it is a hotly contested part of the armistice. In the end, the Israelis got the land agreed upon in the plan of partition. Palestinians did eventually become refugees. They lost their lands and homes and no longer had a national identity. The other thing that we saw was they fled into other countries, which became a strain for the neighboring nations because they took on the refugees. All of the Arab world resented the decision for upsetting the balance for most nations in the region, but an entirely new threat ended up coming to the region during the next phase of world history, which occurred during the Cold War. This would be the Soviet era, and this was going to greatly upset the balance of power, and it still significantly plays a role today. We're seeing this right now with Iran and a lot of their business dealings that have been going on with Russia in the last several decades. Um, so this is kind of where we are going to finish, at least right now. Okay, so we are now in 1948, and this is basically what we have. So we have Jordan has the West Bank. This was done again as a strategic move to hopefully prevent a complete and total takeover of um, of this part. This would be this would cause a war with Israel, and then the Gaza Strip down here. You can see that it was taken by Egypt again strategically to hopefully keep a spot for the Palestinians. The next thing we're going to go into is going to be the 6 Days War, and that is going to be an even bigger mess that we are going to see during the Cold War era. I think that is it for right now. I'm going to chunk this lesson, so the next thing we're going to talk about is are the other regions of Asia, so South Asia, and then what happens in Japan and what happens in French Indochina.